Child calls Black Gardener Daddy in front of guests. Then a stranger walked in and revealed the truth. Welcome to Tales by Ezra. Let's uncover what really happened. The afternoon sun, a benevolent tyrant in the cloudless sky, cast a golden sheen over the sprawling Vance estate, transforming the meticulously manicured lawns into a carpet of emeralds and the blooming roses into jewels of crimson and pearl. It was the kind of day that whispered of perfection, of lives lived effortlessly, a backdrop meticulously curated for the annual Vance summer soiree. Liveried staff moved with practiced invisibility, replenishing champagne flutes and silver platters laden with delicate canapes. Laughter, light and tinkling like wind chimes, drifted from clusters of elegantly dressed guests, their conversations a murmur of society's latest intrigues and triumphs. At the heart of this opulent tableau stood Eleanor Vance, a woman whose poise was as flawless as the diamonds at her throat. Her smile, practiced and radiant, swept across her domain, yet a keen observer might have noticed the subtle tension in the set of her shoulders, the almost imperceptible flicker in her eyes as she surveyed the scene. Her husband, Richard Vance, a man whose success in finance was etched into his confident posture and expensive suit, stood beside her, greeting arrivals with a booming affability that occasionally felt a decibel too loud. Away from the main throng, near the vibrant chaos of the azalea bushes, a different kind of diligence was on display. Samuel, the estate's gardener, moved with a quiet grace that seemed to harmonize with the rustling leaves and the hum of bees. His dark skin, glistening with a light sheen of perspiration under the persistent sun, contrasted with the crisp, clean lines of his simple work attire. His hands, weathered and strong, expertly pruned a stray branch, his focus absolute. He was a fixture at the Vance estate, as much a part of the landscape as the ancient oak tree that shaded the west lawn, yet he remained largely unseen by the glittering assembly, a silent orchestrator of the beauty they so casually enjoyed. Except that is by one small, bright-eyed observer. 5-year-old Lily Vance, a whirlwind of white lace and unrestrained curiosity, found Samuel far more fascinating than the polite, smiling adults. She often shadowed him during his work, her small voice a stream of questions about flowers, bugs, and the mysterious workings of the earth. Samuel, in turn, treated her with a gentle patience, his deep voice, when he spoke, a soothing balm. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond woven from shared moments in the sun-dappled garden, away from the structured demands of Lily's otherwise regimented world. Today, however, Lily was meant to be a miniature hostess, parading her new dress and polite curtsies. But the lure of Samuel, now tending to the fountain where water cascaded over stone cherubs, was too strong. She darted away from her mother's side, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon. Eleanor watched her go, a fleeting expression, almost like a shadow of pain, crossing her face before the hostess' smile snapped back into place. Richard, however, frowned. Eleanor, the child shouldn't be bothering the staff, especially not today. His tone was low, but edged with disapproval. She's just being a child, Richard, Eleanor murmured, though her eyes followed Lily with a complex mix of tenderness and apprehension. Samuel, hearing the light patter of small feet, straightened up and turned, a soft smile touching his lips as Lily skidded to a halt before him, her face alight with excitement. He had a way of looking at her, a depth of affection in his gaze that was profound, yet carefully guarded. Today, something in the air felt different, heavier, as if the perfect summer day held its breath, waiting for a ripple to disturb its serene surface. The murmur of the party, the clinking of glasses, the distant strains of a string quartet, all these sounds wove a tapestry of affluent normalcy. But beneath it, unspoken currents eddied, secrets lay dormant like seeds beneath rich soil, and the innocent heart of a child was about to send in tremor through the carefully constructed facade of the Vance family's world. A tremor that would expose far more than just a misplaced word. The garden seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the vibrant colors almost too bright, the scents of jasmine and honeysuckle almost too sweet, as if nature itself was amplifying the senses in anticipation. Lily, her white dress a stark contrast to Samuel's earth-toned work clothes, reached up a small hand, and Samuel, after a moment's hesitation and a quick, almost imperceptible glance towards the main gathering, took it. Her fingers curled trustingly around his. "Look, Samuel," she chirped, pointing towards a particularly boisterous group of guests near the croquet lawn. "Mrs. Harrington is wearing a hat like a giant pink mushroom." Samuel chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to belong to the garden itself. "Indeed, she is, little sprout. A very impressive mushroom." His eyes, however, held a weariness that belied the lightness of his tone, a subtle acknowledgment of the social chasm that separated his world from the one Lily was born into. Eleanor Vance, ever watchful, noticed the interaction. A knot tightened in her stomach, a familiar unease she had learned to live with, to suppress, but which always resurfaced when Lily and Samuel were together in such an open, observable way. She made a mental note to speak to Samuel later, to gently remind him of the proprieties, the unspoken boundaries that, for everyone's sake, needed to be maintained. She loved Lily's affection for him. Truly she did. But there were appearances to consider, especially with Richard's colleagues and their judgmental wives in attendance. The party was in full swing. Richard was holding court with a group of investors, his voice confident, his gestures expansive. Mrs. Albright, the local society columnist, was taking mental notes, her sharp eyes missing nothing. And then it happened. Lily, still holding Samuel's hand, suddenly spotted her mother across the lawn, engaged in conversation with the formidable Mrs. Harrington, a woman whose opinions could make or break social standings. Perhaps it was the champagne Eleanor was sipping, or the way the sunlight caught her hair, or simply a child's pure, unadulterated burst of affection. Lily pulled away from Samuel slightly, her small face serious, and then, in a voice that carried with surprising clarity across the intervening space, a voice that sliced through the polite murmur of the party like a bell, she called out, "Daddy! Look, Daddy! A butterfly!" The word, so simple, so innocent, hung in the air for a pregnant moment. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. The clinking of glasses ceased. Conversations stuttered and died. Heads turned, not with casual interest, but with a focused, almost predatory curiosity. Samuel froze, his hand, which had been reaching to adjust a sprinkler head, suspended in midair. His dark eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable, shock, fear, perhaps even a deep, hidden pain, passing through them before his expression settled into a stoic mask. Eleanor Vance felt the blood drain from her face. The champagne flute in her hand trembled, threatening to spill its contents. Mrs. Harrington, her giant pink mushroom, hat quivering slightly, raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her gaze sharp and questioning as it fixed first on Lily, then on the stoic, dark-skinned gardener, and finally, with keen interest, on the suddenly pale Eleanor. Richard, mid-sentence with his investors, stopped abruptly. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief, then dawning horror, and finally, a flush of deep, angry crimson that spread from his neck to his temples. The silence that followed Lily's innocent pronouncement was deafening, more impactful than any shout. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions, with sudden, startling assumptions, with the collective gasp of a social circle confronted with something so unexpected, so potentially scandalous, that it defied immediate comprehension. Lily, oblivious to the storm she had unleashed, was now pointing excitedly at a monarch butterfly fluttering near the roses, her face a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. "Did you see it, Daddy?" she repeated, tugging at Samuel's trouser leg, her voice still clear, still innocent, still utterly, devastatingly public. The carefully curated perfection of the Vance summer soiree had just shattered into a million glittering, uncomfortable pieces. The ensuing moments were a masterclass in social awkwardness, a slow-motion car crash of etiquette and unspoken biases. Mrs. Harrington, never one to miss an opportunity for drama or to exert her social authority, was the first to break the suffocating silence. Her voice, though pitched low, carried a distinct chill. "Well, Eleanor," she began, her eyes, like chips of ice, moving from the frozen Samuel back to her hostess. "That's quite a term of endearment. Does your little Lily often get confused about familial roles?" The insinuation was as sharp as a shard of glass, and it drew a fresh wave of color to Eleanor's already pale cheeks. She stammered, searching for words, for an explanation that wouldn't sound utterly ridiculous or worse, incriminating. "Oh, Mrs. Harrington, you know children," Eleanor managed, her laugh a brittle, unconvincing sound. She sometimes calls all sorts of people affectionate names. It's just a phase." Her eyes darted towards Samuel, a silent, desperate plea for him to do something, say something, to diffuse the ticking bomb of Lily's innocent declaration. Samuel, however, remained a statue of composure, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the rose bushes. His silence was a wall, unbreachable, offering no escape route for Eleanor. He looked like a man bracing for an inevitable impact, his dignity his only shield. Richard Vance, on the other hand, was anything but composed. He strode across the lawn, his face a thundercloud, his earlier bonhomie replaced by a palpable fury. He ignored Lily, who looked up at him with a slightly puzzled expression, and came to a halt directly in front of Samuel. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard hissed, his voice low and dangerous, intended for Samuel alone, but radiating enough anger to make nearby guests visibly uncomfortable. "Why will my daughter call you that?" Samuel met Richard's furious gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Sir," he said, his voice calm and even, betraying no hint of the turmoil that must have been raging within, "I believe it is simply a child's fancy. She means no harm." "Fancy?" Richard scoffed, his hands clenching at his sides. "This is beyond fancy, man. This is embarrassing, utterly mortifying." His eyes swept around at the watching guests, their faces a mixture of curiosity, pity, and thinly veiled amusement. He felt their judgment, their whispered speculations, and it fueled his rage. Eleanor hurried to his side, placing a placating hand on his arm. "Richard, please," she urged in a low tone. "Not here. Let's not make a scene." But the scene had already been made. Mrs. Harrington, with a small, knowing smile, turned to her companion, Mrs. Albright, the columnist, and whispered something that made Mrs. Albright's eyes gleam with journalistic fervor. The story was already writing itself in her mind. Other guests began to murmur amongst themselves. "Did you hear that? The gardener? How utterly bizarre. Eleanor looks like she's seen a ghost." The whispers were like 1,000 tiny needles, pricking at Eleanor's composure. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. Lily, sensing the tension, her lower lip began to tremble. "Mommy," she asked, her voice small and uncertain, "is Daddy Samuel mad?" The renewed use of the term, even in a question, sent another jolt through the crowd. Richard looked as if he might explode. Eleanor quickly knelt beside Lily, forcing a reassuring smile. "No, sweetheart, no one is mad. It's just a silly misunderstanding. Samuel is Samuel, our gardener, and Daddy is Daddy Richard." She glanced up at Samuel, her eyes pleading with him to support her, to gently correct the child. Samuel's gaze softened as he looked at Lily, but he said nothing to contradict her. He simply offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture that could have meant anything or nothing at all. The ambiguity was maddening for Eleanor. This was a nightmare. Her perfect party, her carefully constructed world, was unraveling thread by innocent thread, all because of a child's inexplicable and very public affection for the hired help. The social implications were horrifying to contemplate. What would people think? What would they say? The truth, whatever it was, seemed less important in that moment than the urgent need to control the narrative, to smother the spark of scandal before it roared into an uncontrollable blaze. But the spark had already caught, and the kindling of gossip was dry and plentiful. The ordeal in the garden left an indelible stain on the afternoon, a palpable tension that no amount of champagne or polite conversation could entirely dissipate. Eleanor, with a forced smile and a strained apology about Lily being overtired, had managed to gently steer her daughter indoors, away from the prying eyes and whispering guests. Richard, after a final glare at Samuel, had rejoined his business associates, attempting to salvage the remnants of his composure and authority, though the angry flush still lingered on his cheeks. Samuel, left alone amidst the roses and the judgment, had quietly resumed his work, his movements precise and methodical, as if tending to the flowers was the only sane and steady thing in a world suddenly tilted on its axis. He offered no explanation, no apology, no defense. He simply existed, a quiet rebuke to the storm of assumptions swirling around him. Later, as the party began to wind down and the last of the guests offered their strained farewells, Eleanor found Samuel in the potting shed, carefully cleaning his tools. The air in the small, cluttered space was thick with the scent of damp earth and unspoken words. Eleanor closed the door behind her, the click of the latch sounding unnervously loud in the sudden quiet. "Samuel," she began, her voice low and trembling slightly, "we need to talk about what happened." Samuel continued to wipe down a pair of shears, his back partially to her. "There is nothing to talk about, Mrs. Vance. It was a child's innocent mistake." "Innocent." Eleanor's voice rose a notch, a hint of hysteria creeping in. "Samuel, she called you daddy in front of everyone, in front of Richard. Do you have any idea how that looked? What people are thinking?" Samuel finally turned, his dark eyes meeting hers. They were filled with a deep, weary sadness, but also an unyielding strength. "What people think is their own affair, madam. I cannot control their thoughts, nor would I try. But you must understand the position you've put me in, the position you've put this family in." Eleanor wrung her hands, pacing the small space. "Richard is furious. He wants you gone. He said so." Samuel's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something, resignation, perhaps, crossed his features. "If that is his wish, and yours, then I will, of course, comply. I would not wish to cause any further distress." "Distress?" Eleanor almost laughed. "It's more than distress, Samuel. It's a scandal. Mrs. Harrington will have this all over town by morning. And Lily keeps asking for you. She keeps insisting." Her voice broke slightly. "Why, Samuel? Why would she say that? Have you encouraged this in some way?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and unfair, born of Eleanor's desperation and fear. Samuel's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath it. "I have only ever shown your daughter kindness and respect, Mrs. Vance. The same kindness and respect I endeavor to show all living things. If she has formed some attachment, it is born of her own innocent heart, not of any design on my part." He paused, then added, his gaze unwavering, "Perhaps you should ask yourself why your daughter seeks paternal affection from a gardener, rather than from her own father." The words were a gentle admonishment, yet they struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. She recoiled as if slapped, her defensiveness momentarily crumbling. Was he right? Had Richard's preoccupation with work, his often impatient demeanor with Lily, created a void that Samuel, with his quiet warmth, had inadvertently filled? The thought was discomfiting, another layer of complexity in an already impossible situation. "That's unfair," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Richard loves Lily." "Love can be shown in many ways, madam," Samuel said softly. "A child understands the language of presence, of attention, of gentle guidance. These are things I have offered freely as one human being to another." He turned back to his tools, the conversation apparently over in his mind. Eleanor watched him, her anger deflating, replaced by a confusing mix of guilt, frustration, and a strange, unwilling admiration for his unshakable dignity. She had come to the potting shed seeking to assert her authority, to demand answers, perhaps even to dismiss him. Instead, she found herself questioning her own assumptions, her own life. The secret, whatever its nature, was not just Samuel's to bear. It was hers too, a reflection of the fractures within her own carefully constructed world. As she left the shed, the setting sun casting long, mournful shadows across the lawn, she felt more lost and alone than ever. The whispers of the guests were fading, but a new, more insistent voice was rising within her, the voice of a truth she had tried for too long to ignore. The days that followed the ill-fated soiree were heavy with an unspoken tension that permeated every corner of the Vance household. Richard remained distant and irritable, his displeasure a constant, simmering presence. He barely spoke to Eleanor, and his interactions with Lily were curt, almost resentful, as if he blamed the child for the public embarrassment. Lily, in turn, became more withdrawn, her usual bright energy subdued. She asked for Samuel repeatedly, her small face clouding over with confusion when her mother offered vague excuses about him being busy or unwell. Eleanor found herself caught in an impossible vice. On one hand, there was Richard's cold fury and the palpable judgment of their social circle. Mrs. Harrington, true to form, had indeed spread the tale with embellishments, and the Vances found themselves the subject of thinly veiled gossip and speculative whispers wherever they went. Invitations seemed to dry up. Phone calls went unreturned. On the other hand, there was Samuel's quiet dignity and Lily's persistent, innocent longing. Eleanor couldn't bring herself to dismiss Samuel outright, as Richard demanded. Partly, it was a practical matter. He was an excellent gardener, and the estate had never looked better. But more profoundly, a seed of doubt, or perhaps a seed of conscience, had been planted by Samuel's words in the potting shed. She replayed their conversation over and over in her mind, his calm assertion of kindness, his subtle implication of Richard's parental shortcomings. She started watching Richard more closely, noticing how often he was on his phone during family dinners, how easily his patience wore thin with Lily's childish demands, how his praise was often reserved for her achievements rather than her simple presence. The comparison with Samuel's gentle, unwavering attention to Lily was stark and unsettling. One afternoon, Eleanor found Lily sitting alone in the garden, near the rose bushes Samuel had so meticulously tended. She was talking softly to a ladybug on her finger. "Samuel wouldn't know your name," Lily murmured, her voice tinged with sadness. Eleanor's heart ached. She sat down beside her daughter on the grass. "Sweetheart," she began gently, "why did you call Samuel Daddy at the party?" Lily looked up, her blue eyes, so like Eleanor's own, wide and earnest. "Because he feels like Daddy," she said simply. "He listens to me. He tells me stories about the flowers. He makes me feel safe." "But Daddy Richard is your daddy," Eleanor pressed, feeling a pang of guilt even as she said it. Lily frowned. "Daddy Richard is busy. He gets cross when I spill things. Samuel never gets cross. He just smiles." The innocent honesty of a child cut through all of Eleanor's carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't about a phase or a silly misunderstanding. This was about her daughter's genuine emotional needs that were apparently being met by the gardener in a way they weren't by her own husband. That evening, Eleanor tried to talk to Richard again. "We need to address this situation with Lily, Richard. She misses Samuel. And frankly, his dismissal seems unfair given it was Lily who spoke out." Richard, who was engrossed in a stock market report on his tablet, barely looked up. "Unfair? Eleanor, the man allowed our daughter to call him father in public. It's utterly inappropriate. He's a gardener, for heaven's sake. What's there to discuss? He needs to go. End of story." "But what if Lily is seeking something from him that she's not getting from us? From you?" Eleanor ventured, her voice hesitant. Richard finally slammed his tablet down. "Are you blaming me now for the fact that our daughter has apparently formed some bizarre attachment to the hired help? This is ridiculous. The man is manipulating her, or he's simply not bright enough to understand boundaries. Either way, he's a liability." "I don't think he's manipulating her," Eleanor said quietly. "I think he's genuinely kind to her." "Kindness doesn't pay the bills, Eleanor. and it certainly doesn't undo the damage to our reputation. Richard stood up, pacing the room. I've already started looking for a new gardening service. Discreet, professional, someone who understands their place. The coldness in his voice sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. This wasn't just about social embarrassment anymore. This was about Richard's pride, his control, his unwillingness to look inward. A few days later, a sleek, unmarked car pulled up to the Vance estate. A woman in a sharply tailored suit emerged, carrying a briefcase. She wasn't a guest, nor was she from any of the usual service companies. She asked to speak to Mrs. Vance, her demeanor polite but firm, her eyes assessing. Eleanor, feeling a sense of inexplicable dread, met her in the formal living room. Mrs. Vance, the woman began, her voice neutral. My name is Ms. Albright from Child and Family Services. We've received an anonymous report expressing some concerns regarding your daughter, Lily, and her interactions with an employee here. Eleanor felt the room spin. Child and Family Services? An anonymous report? This was escalating beyond her worst nightmares. Concerns? She echoed, her voice barely a whisper. What kind of concerns? Ms. Albright opened her briefcase. The report mentions a public incident where your daughter referred to a staff member, a Mr. Samuel, as her father. It suggests an unusually close relationship that might warrant a review to ensure the child's environment is entirely appropriate. The implication was clear and horrifying. Someone was twisting Lily's innocent affection into something sinister, something that could threaten the very fabric of their family. Was it Mrs. Harrington, taking her gossip to a new, malicious level? Or someone else, someone with an even darker agenda? The arrival of Ms. Albright was no longer just a ripple. It was a tidal wave, threatening to engulf them all. The secret, whatever its origin, whatever its truth, was no longer content to stay hidden. It was clawing its way to the surface, and the carefully constructed world of Eleanor Vance was about to be torn apart. The presence of Ms. Albright from Child and Family Services cast a chilling pall over the Vance household. Eleanor, though initially shaken, quickly rallied her composure, keenly aware that any sign of panic or defensiveness could be misconstrued. She answered Ms. Albright's questions with carefully measured calmness, emphasizing Lily's imaginative nature and the family's deep love for their daughter. She downplayed the incident at the party as a childish whim, a momentary confusion. Richard, when he was called in, was less composed. He was visibly irate, viewing Ms. Albright's presence as an outrageous intrusion, a further humiliation. His blustering defensiveness and thinly veiled threats about his lawyers and connections did little to help their case, and Eleanor shot him several warning glances. Ms. Albright remained professional and impassive throughout, taking copious notes, her expression unreadable. She requested to speak with Lily alone, a request that Eleanor, despite her misgivings, knew she couldn't reasonably refuse. She also asked to speak with Samuel. Mr. Samuel is no longer in our employ, Richard stated abruptly, before Eleanor could intervene. His services were terminated a few days ago. Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow. Oh, may I ask the reason for his termination? His work was unsatisfactory, Richard said, avoiding her gaze. Eleanor cringed internally. The lie was clumsy, transparent. Samuel's work had been exemplary. Ms. Albright made a note. I see. Would you have a forwarding address or contact information for him? It's standard procedure to speak with all individuals mentioned in such reports. We do not, Richard said curtly. He was a contract gardener. We don't keep such records for temporary staff. Another lie. Samuel had worked for them for over 2 years. The web of deception was growing, and Eleanor felt increasingly trapped within it. After Ms. Albright left, promising a follow-up, a furious argument erupted between Eleanor and Richard. How could you lie like that? Eleanor demanded. She's not stupid, Richard. She'll see right through it. And terminating Samuel right before she arrives? It looks incredibly suspicious. What was I supposed to do, Eleanor? Richard roared back. Let her interrogate the man? Let him fill her head with more nonsense about Lily? I did what was necessary to protect this family, To protect our reputation. Protect your reputation, you mean? Eleanor retorted, her voice shaking with anger and a dawning, bitter understanding. This has always been about your pride, your image. You don't care about Lily's feelings or about what's right. The accusation hung in the air, raw and undeniable. The chasm between them had never felt wider. The following days were filled with a gnawing anxiety. Eleanor found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, jumping at every unexpected phone call. The thought of child and family services scrutinizing their lives, their parenting, was a terrifying prospect. She missed Samuel, not just for his skill in the garden, but for his quiet, steady presence, a presence that now felt like a lost anchor in a turbulent sea. Lily was listless, her questions about Samuel becoming more plaintive. She drew pictures of him in the garden, her crayon strokes imbued with a child's poignant longing. One evening, as Eleanor was tucking Lily into bed, Lily whispered, "Mommy, why did the lady ask me so many questions about Samuel Daddy?" Eleanor's heart clenched. She had tried to shield Lily from the true nature of Ms. Albright's visit, but children were perceptive. She was just curious, sweetheart, about all your friends. "Is Samuel my friend?" Lily asked, her eyes wide. "Yes, darling. A very good friend." "Then why did he go away?" The question was simple, yet Eleanor had no easy answer, none that wouldn't involve the complicated, ugly truths of the adult world. She felt a profound sense of failure, not just as a wife, but as a mother. She was failing to protect Lily, not from Samuel, but from the fallout of secrets and deceptions, many of which she was beginning to realize were her own. Then, about a week after Ms. Albright's visit, another unexpected visitor arrived at the Vance estate. This time, it wasn't an official in a suit, but a woman whose face was both startlingly familiar and yet changed by the passage of years. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes holding a wisdom that spoke of hardships endured, but there was no mistaking her. It was Clara, Eleanor's estranged younger sister. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade, not since a bitter family feud had torn them apart. Clara, a freelance journalist with a reputation for tenacity and a somewhat bohemian lifestyle, had always been the unconventional one, the truth-teller, often to the discomfort of the more image-conscious Eleanor. Her arrival was unannounced, uninvited, and deeply unsettling for Eleanor. Clara stood on the doorstep, a small, worn suitcase at her feet, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Hello, Eleanor," she said, her voice devoid of its old warmth, replaced by a cool, appraising tone. "I heard you might be in some trouble. Thought I'd come see for myself." The timing was too coincidental. How had Clara heard? And what did she mean by trouble? Eleanor's mind raced. Had the gossip about the party, about Samuel, reached even her estranged sister? Or was this about something else entirely? The sudden appearance of Clara felt like another ill omen, another piece of Eleanor's carefully controlled world threatening to break away. The stranger had arrived, not in the form of an official, but as a ghost from her own past, a past that held secrets even deeper and more resonant than the ones currently plaguing her. Clara's presence in the Vance mansion was like a stone dropped into a still, albeit murky, pond. Ripples of unease spread through the household. Richard, when he learned of her arrival, was incensed. "What is she doing here?" he demanded of Eleanor in a furious whisper. "After all these years, and now of all times? Get rid of her, Eleanor. I don't want that woman under my roof." But Eleanor, already reeling from the CFS investigation and her own internal turmoil, found herself strangely unable to dismiss her sister. There was a look in Clara's eyes, a quiet determination, that suggested she wouldn't be easily turned away. Besides, a part of Eleanor, a long-buried part, felt a flicker of something akin to relief at seeing a familiar, if estranged face. "She's my sister, Richard," Eleanor said, her voice weary. "I can't just throw her out. Let her stay a few days. It might look better, more normal, if CFS comes back." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. Clara was anything but a symbol of normalcy in their world. Clara, for her part, moved through the opulent rooms with an air of detached observation, like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. She was polite to Richard, though there was a clear coolness between them. With Lily, however, she was instantly warm and engaging. Lily, starved for uncomplicated affection, gravitated towards her newfound aunt, chattering away about her toys, her garden discoveries, and, inevitably, about Samuel. "Aunt Clara, do you know Samuel?" Lily asked one afternoon, as Clara helped her build a tower of blocks in the sunroom. "He's the bestest gardener, and he tells stories." Clara's gaze sharpened slightly. "Samuel, you say? Tell me about him, sweet pea." And Lily did, her innocent words painting a portrait of a kind, gentle man who listened patiently and knew the secrets of the earth. Eleanor, listening from the doorway, felt a familiar pang. Clara watched Lily intently. Then her eyes met Eleanor's over the child's head. There was a question in Clara's gaze, a knowingness that made Eleanor profoundly uncomfortable. Later that evening, after Lily was asleep, Clara found Eleanor alone in the library, staring blankly at a book. "So," Clara began, perching on the arm of a leather armchair, "this Samuel. He seems to have made quite an impression on Lily." Eleanor sighed, closing her book. "It's complicated, Clara." "Life usually is," Clara replied dryly, "especially when people try to make it simple by hiding things." She paused, then her voice softened slightly. "I read about the party, Eleanor. Some society blog. It was quite the story. Little girl calls the black gardener daddy in front of all of Bellevue County. And now Child of Family Services is sniffing around. Is that about the sum of it?" Eleanor flinched at the blunt summary. "It's not as sordid as it sounds. Lily is just imaginative. Is she?" Clara's voice was gentle, but probing. Or is she perceptive? Children often see truths that adults try to ignore. She leaned forward. "Eleanor, we haven't spoken in years. I didn't come here to dredge up old arguments or to judge your life. But I know you, and I know when you're in over your head. What's really going on with this gardener, Samuel?" Eleanor hesitated. Years of estrangement, of carefully guarded emotions, made it difficult to confide in Clara. But there was also a desperate need to talk to someone who wasn't Richard, someone who might understand. He's a good man, Clara. Kind. Lily adores him. And Richard fired him after the party. Then CFS showed up. Richard lied to them, said Samuel's work was unsatisfactory. And was it? No. Eleanor admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He was the best gardener we've ever had. Clara nodded slowly. So, a good man, kind to your child, excellent at his job, gets fired because your husband is embarrassed and Lily calls him an affectionate name. And now, conveniently, someone makes an anonymous complaint to CFS, suggesting something inappropriate. Doesn't that strike you as a little too neat? Eleanor looked at her sister, a new, horrifying thought dawning. You don't think could Richard have made the anonymous call? To discredit Samuel further? To ensure he was out of their lives for good? And perhaps to shift blame if their parenting came under scrutiny? The idea was monstrous, yet, given Richard's recent behavior, his obsession with reputation, it wasn't entirely unbelievable. I don't know what to think, Eleanor, Clara said, her eyes searching her sister's face. But I do know that secrets have a way of festering. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to bring them into the light, no matter how painful it might be. She stood up. I'm going to stay for a while, whether you or Richard like it or not. Maybe I can help, or maybe I'll just stir up more trouble. She gave a wry smile. Old habits die hard. As Clara left the library, Eleanor felt a shift within her. Her sister's presence, her probing questions, her refusal to accept easy answers, had cracked open a window in the suffocating room of Eleanor's fear and confusion. The stranger had indeed arrived, and she wasn't just an observer. Clara was a catalyst, and the truth, whatever its final, devastating form, was now undeniably, unstoppably on its way. Clara, true to her word, settled into the Vance household like an uninvited, yet increasingly indispensable, fixture. She spent her days observing, listening, and, much to Richard's chagrin, asking pointed questions. Her primary focus, however, was Lily. She took the child on walks in the garden, patiently listened to her stories, and gently probed her feelings about Samuel. Did Samuel ever talk about his own family, Lilybug? Clara asked one sunny morning as they examined a ladybug. Lily shook her head, her brow furrowed in thought. No, he mostly talked about flowers. And sometimes he looked sad, like he missed someone. Clara made a mental note. She also made a point of speaking with the remaining household staff, the cook, the housekeeper, discreetly gathering their impressions of Samuel, of the Van Cess, of the general atmosphere in the house. What emerged was a consistent picture of Samuel as a quiet, respectful, and hard-working man, deeply fond of Lily, and of Richard Vance as an often absent, demanding employer with a quick temper. Eleanor found herself drawn into long, late-night conversations with Clara, conversations that invariably circled back to Samuel and the secrets of the past. Years of resentment and unspoken hurt between the sisters began to slowly thaw, replaced by a tentative, fragile understanding. "Why did you and Richard get married, Elle?" Clara asked one night, her voice surprisingly gentle. They were in Eleanor's private sitting room, a place Richard rarely entered. Eleanor traced the rim of her wine glass. "He was stable, successful. He offered me a life my parents always wanted for me, security, and love." Clara pressed. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "I thought so, at the time. Or maybe I convinced myself it was love." She looked at Clara, her eyes shadowed. "It's not easy, admitting you might have made a mistake with your entire life." "No one said it was easy," Clara said softly. "But living a lie is harder in the long run." Then she shifted the subject, her journalistic instincts kicking in. This anonymous tip to CFS. It came shortly after Richard fired Samuel. And Richard was very specific about not having Samuel's contact information. "Did you ever find out where Samuel went?" Eleanor shook her head. Richard handled his dismissal. "He just disappeared." "People don't just disappear, Eleanor. Especially not people who leave a mark on a child's heart like Samuel did on Lily's." Clara's eyes narrowed. "I think I'm going to try and find him." And so, Clara began her search. She started with landscaping companies in the area, then moved on to community centers, churches, anywhere a man like Samuel might seek work or solace. It was a painstaking process, a search for a needle in a societal haystack. Meanwhile, the pressure from CFS continued. Ms. Albright made another visit, her questions more pointed this time. She expressed concern about the emotional climate in the Vance home, about Lily's subdued behavior, and about the convenient dismissal of Samuel. Richard's attempts to intimidate her with legal jargon only seemed to strengthen her resolve. Eleanor felt like she was drowning. Richard was becoming more tyrannical, blaming her for Clara's presence, for the ongoing CFS investigation, for everything. Lily was clearly unhappy, missing Samuel, and confused by the tension in the house. One afternoon, Clara returned from one of her searching expeditions, a thoughtful, almost excited expression on her face. She found Eleanor in the garden, listlessly staring at the overgrown rose bushes that Samuel had once tended with such care. "I think I found him," Clara said quietly. Eleanor's head snapped up. "Samuel? Where? Is he all right?" "He's working at a small community garden project in the inner city," Clara said, "helping at-risk youth learn about horticulture. It took some digging, but I tracked him down." She paused. "He looks tired, Eleanor, and sad." But he asked about Lily. The first thing he asked. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, relief, guilt, and an overwhelming desire to see him, to talk to him, to understand. "Did you tell him about CFS?" Clara nodded. "I had to. He deserved to know that someone might be trying to paint him in a false light." "And what did he say?" "He was quiet for a long time," Clara said. "Then he just said, 'The truth has a way of finding its own season to bloom.'" Clara looked at Eleanor, her gaze intense. "Eleanor, I also found something else. Something about Samuel's past. Something I think you need to know. Something that might explain a lot of things." She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. It seems Samuel wasn't always a gardener. Years ago, before he came to work for you, he was a teacher. A primary school teacher, much loved by his students. He lost his job, his career, his wife even, after a tragic accident involving a school field trip. A child in his care died. He was cleared of any negligence, but the guilt, the grief, it broke him. He retreated from the world, took up gardening as a way to heal, to find peace. Eleanor stared at her sister, speechless. A teacher, a man who had loved and lost a child in his care. It cast a whole new light on his gentle interactions with Lily, his patience, his quiet sadness. It also made the anonymous accusation to CFS, implying any impropriety towards Lily, seem even more vile, more cruel. But there's more, Clara continued, her voice dropping lower. The school where he taught, the child who died. Eleanor, it was the same school you attended briefly, years ago, before you transferred. And the child, do you remember a little girl named Sarah? Sarah Miller. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Sarah Miller, a name from a distant, almost forgotten past. A small, bright girl who had been her friend. A field trip, a terrible accident. She had been so young, but the memory, long suppressed, came flooding back with horrifying clarity. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Samuel was Sarah's teacher. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far more complex and devastating than she could ever have imagined. The connection between Samuel and her family wasn't just about Lily's innocent affection. It was rooted in a shared, unspoken tragedy from the past, a tragedy that had shaped both their lives in ways she was only now beginning to comprehend. The stranger hadn't just revealed a truth about Samuel. She was unearthing a truth about Eleanor herself. The revelation that Samuel had been her childhood friend Sarah Miller's teacher, and that he had been present during the tragic accident that claimed Sarah's life, struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. It was as if a hidden fault line in her memory had suddenly ruptured, releasing a torrent of long-buried grief and guilt. She remembered Sarah, a vibrant, giggling companion from her early school days. She remembered the excitement of the field trip, the sudden chaos, the sirens, the hushed, horrified whispers of the adults. She had been too young to fully grasp the finality of it then, but the shadow of that day had lingered. And Samuel, Mr. Johnson, as he would have been known then, had been there. A kind, young teacher, always with a smile for the children. Now, his quiet sadness, the weariness in his eyes, made a terrible, poignant sense. He wasn't just a gardener. He was a man carrying an immense burden, a man whose life had been irrevocably altered by tragedy that had also, however peripherally, touched her own. "Clara," Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse, "does he know who I am? That I was Sarah's friend?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. Your surname is different now, obviously. And it was a long time ago. You were just little girls. But Eleanor, this changes things, doesn't it? His connection to Lily, it might not just be her seeking affection. There might be something deeper, something almost fated, in his presence here." Eleanor felt a dizzying wave of confusion. Was it possible? Could Samuel, on some subconscious level, have been drawn to their family, to Lily, because of this shared, unspoken past? Or was it all just a tragic, complicated coincidence? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswerable, unsettling. That evening, the atmosphere in the Vance mansion was even more strained than usual. Richard, oblivious to Eleanor's internal turmoil, was still fuming about Clara's extended stay and the unresolved CFS issue. Eleanor, however, could barely focus on his complaints. Her mind was consumed by the new knowledge about Samuel. She had to see him. She had to talk to him. The next morning, Eleanor told Richard she was going out for a drive, a vague excuse that he accepted with a dismissive wave. With Clara providing a hastily scribbled address, Eleanor drove towards the inner-city community garden where Samuel now worked. It was a world away from the manicured perfection of Bellevue County. Here, the gardens were vibrant but scrappy, bursting with life amidst the concrete and steel of the city. She found Samuel kneeling beside a raised bed, patiently showing a group of teenagers how to transplant seedlings. He looked different here, more at ease, his earlier weariness replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. When he saw Eleanor approaching, his expression was one of polite surprise, quickly masked. "Mrs. Vance," he said, rising to his feet, wiping his earthy hands on his trousers. "This is unexpected." "Samuel," Eleanor began, her voice trembling slightly, I needed to talk to you. About Lily. About everything." The teenagers, sensing a private conversation, discreetly moved away. Eleanor took a deep breath. "Samuel, my sister Clara told me about your past. About you being a teacher. About a little girl named Sarah Miller." Samuel's face, already etched with a certain sorrow, seemed to crumple. He turned away, his shoulders slumping. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant sounds of city traffic and the chirping of sparrows. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Sarah was a bright light. Her loss, it changed everything for me. I knew Sarah," Eleanor said softly. "We were friends. I was on that field trip, Samuel. I was there that day." Samuel turned back slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief, searching her face. "You were one of Mrs. Albright's little ones?" "Eleanor. Kenwood." He used her maiden name, the name she had carried as a child. Eleanor nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes." A wave of understanding, of shared grief, passed between them. It was a connection forged in tragedy, a bond that transcended employer and employee, social class, and the passage of years. "I never knew," Samuel whispered, shaking his head. "All this time, working in your garden, watching Lily grow." He trailed off, overcome. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Eleanor asked. "About Sarah? About being a teacher? What was there to say?" Samuel replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "My past is my own burden to bear. I came to your estate seeking peace, a quiet place to work with the earth. I never intended for any of this to happen. And Lily," Eleanor pressed gently, "your affection for her, was it just because she's a sweet child? Or is there something more?" Samuel looked away again, towards the struggling city garden, a place of fragile beauty. "Lily, she has Sarah's spirit," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Her curiosity, her laughter. Being with her, it was like a small piece of the light I lost coming back into my world." He paused, then met Eleanor's gaze, his own eyes filled with a raw, undeniable honesty. "But Mrs. Vance..." "Eleanor, there is something else. Something you deserve to know. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but I was a coward. I was afraid." Eleanor's heart pounded. What more could there be? What other secret was about to be unearthed? "Lily calls me Daddy," Samuel continued, his voice barely a whisper, not just out of childish fancy. "Not just because she feels a connection to me, but because in a way she cannot possibly understand. It is the truth." Eleanor stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. "The truth? Samuel, what are you saying?" Samuel took a deep, shuddering breath. "Eleanor, I am Lily's biological father." The world stopped. The sounds of the city faded. The vibrant colors of the garden blurred. All Eleanor could see was Samuel's face, etched with pain, with regret, with a truth so monumental, so life-altering, that it threatened to shatter everything she had ever believed about her life, her marriage, her daughter. The carefully constructed facade of her existence had not just been cracked. It had been utterly demolished. The weight of Samuel's confession pressed down on Eleanor, stealing her breath, making the very air around her feel thick and unyielding. "Lily's father," she repeated, the words foreign and unbelievable on her tongue. Her mind reeled, desperately trying to reconcile this shocking revelation with the reality she had known, or thought she had known, for the past 5 years. Samuel's face was a mask of anguish. "Yes, Eleanor. It's a long and painful story, one I have carried alone for too many years." He gestured to a worn wooden bench nearby. "Please, let me try to explain." Numbly, Eleanor allowed him to guide her to the bench. The sounds of the community garden, the distant laughter of the teenagers, seemed to come from another world. "Years ago," Samuel began, his voice low and strained. Long before I came to work for you, long before Richard, there was you and me. Briefly, it was a difficult time for both of us, I think. You were young, uncertain about your future. I was still grappling with the aftermath of Sarah's death, lost in my own grief. Eleanor's memory, prodded by his words, flickered. A time of confusion in her early 20s, a period she had largely blocked out. A whirlwind romance, intense and fleeting, with a kind, soulful man whose name she had almost forgotten until now. A man who had listened to her fears and dreams, who had offered comfort when she felt adrift. A man who, she now realized with a sickening lurch, was Samuel. "It was you," she whispered, staring at his weathered face, trying to see the younger man she had known. The eyes were the same, deep and sad, but life had carved new lines, new sorrows into his features. Samuel nodded. "We were careless, young and foolish. When you told me you were pregnant, I was overwhelmed, scared. I wasn't ready to be a father, not then. Not after what happened with Sarah. And you were terrified of what your family would say of the scandal." The shame of that time washed over Eleanor. He was right. She had been terrified. Her parents, with their rigid expectations, their emphasis on social standing, the thought of telling them she was pregnant, and by a man they would deem entirely unsuitable, had been unbearable. You disappeared," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible. "I tried to find you, but you were gone. I ran," Samuel admitted, his voice heavy with self-reproach. "I was a coward. I convinced myself it was for the best for you, that you would find someone more appropriate, someone who could give you and the child the life you deserved. When I heard, much later, that you had married Richard Vance, a man of means and standing, I assumed you had moved on, that the child was his." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I never stopped thinking about you, about the baby, but I told myself I had forfeited any right to be a part of your lives. Then, years later, after my wife passed and I was adrift again, I saw an advertisement for a gardener at the Vance estate. It felt like fate, a chance to be near, to see the child, even if only from a distance. I never intended to reveal myself. I just wanted to watch her grow, to know she was happy." So, all this time, Eleanor said, her mind struggling to absorb the enormity of it. "Working in our garden, seeing Lily every day, you knew?" "Yes," Samuel said, his voice cracking. "Every day was both a joy and a torment. To see her, to hear her laugh, and to know I could never claim her as my own." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. The implications were staggering. Richard was not Lily's biological father. Her entire marriage, the foundation of her family, was built on a lie she herself had propagated, albeit unknowingly in its full extent until this very moment. She had believed her brief, youthful affair had ended without consequence beyond her own heartache. "Richard doesn't know?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Samuel shook his head. "No one knows, except now you and your sister. Clara," Eleanor breathed. "Does Clara know this? Is this what she meant?" Samuel looked surprised. "Your sister?" "No. I told her only of my past as a teacher, of Sarah. Nothing more. I couldn't burden anyone else with this." So Clara's intuition, her journalistic probing, had unearthed one layer of Samuel's past, but not this, the deepest, most seismic secret of all. The revelation hung between them, raw and terrifying. Lily, her precious, innocent Lily, was Samuel's daughter. The man Richard had scorned, dismissed as mere hired help, was bound to their family by the most intimate, unbreakable tie. "Why tell me now, Samuel?" Eleanor asked, her voice choked with emotion. "After all these years? After everything that's happened?" "Because of Lily," Samuel said, his gaze unwavering. "Because she called me daddy, and the world tried to shame her for it, to shame me for it. Because I can no longer stand by and watch her be confused or watch you suffer under the weight of this. And because I heard about the CFS investigation. Someone is trying to use Lily, to use my presence in her life, to cause harm. The truth, however painful, is better than lies that can be twisted into weapons." He reached out, then hesitated, letting his hand fall back to his side. "Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But Lily deserves to know who she is. And you deserve to live without this shadow." Eleanor sat in stunned silence, the world tilting on its axis. Samuel, the quiet gardener, Lily's biological father. Her past, her present, her future, all irrevocably altered by this one devastating truth. The carefully constructed walls around her heart, around her life, had crumbled to dust. And in the ruins, she had to decide what to do, how to move forward, how to protect her daughter from a truth that could either liberate her or destroy her. The stranger, in this case, was not Clara, but Samuel himself, revealing a part of his identity, their shared identity, that would change everything. The drive back to Bellevue County was a blur for Eleanor. Samuel's words echoed in her mind, each syllable a hammer blow against the foundations of her life. Lily's father. It was a truth so profound, so elemental, it overshadowed everything else. The party, Mrs. Harrington's gossip, Richard's anger, even the CFS investigation seemed almost trivial in comparison. How could she have not known? How could she have been so blind? The youthful affair, buried under years of social pressure and willed forgetfulness, now resurfaced with a startling, painful clarity. She remembered his kindness, his gentle eyes, the brief, intense connection they had shared during a lonely and confusing period of her life. And then, the panic, the fear, when she realized she was pregnant. Her parents' reaction, her own terror of a ruined future. Samuel had disappeared, and she had, with a mixture of relief and residual guilt, allowed herself to believe it was over. When Richard Vance had come along, with his confidence, his wealth, his offer of a secure, socially acceptable life, she had grasped it like a drowning woman grasping a raft. She had convinced herself that Lily was Richard's child, had pushed down any lingering doubts, any inconvenient memories. Now, the truth had come roaring back, and it was undeniable. When she arrived home, Clara was waiting, her expression one of anxious concern. "Eleanor, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Eleanor could only nod, tears streaming down her face. She collapsed onto a sofa, the story tumbling out, not just about Samuel being Sarah Miller's teacher, but the far greater revelation of his paternity. Clara listened in stunned silence, her usual journalistic composure giving way to wide-eyed disbelief. "Samuel is Lily's father?" she finally whispered, shaking her head. "My God, Eleanor, all these years. I didn't know, Clara," Eleanor sobbed. "Not really. I mean, there was a time long ago, but I convinced myself." "Oh, what have I done? What are you going to do?" Clara asked, her voice gentle but firm. That was the question, wasn't it? What now? The truth was a volatile, dangerous thing. How would Richard react? He, who prized his lineage, his reputation, above all else? He would be devastated, humiliated, enraged. Their marriage, already strained, would surely not survive this. And Lily? How do you tell a 5-year-old girl that the man she knows as her father is not, and that the kind gardener she adores is, in fact, her biological parent? The potential for confusion, for emotional damage, was immense. "I have to tell Richard," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. I can't keep this from him any longer. It's not fair to him, however flawed he may be. And it's certainly not fair to Lily or to Samuel." Clara nodded slowly. "It will be difficult." Understatement of the century. "Are you prepared for the fallout?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, but I have to do it anyway." That evening, she confronted Richard. She chose the library, a room that always felt like his domain, his fortress. She asked Clara to be present, for support, and perhaps as a witness. Richard was, predictably, dismissive at first. "More drama. Eleanor, what is it now? Has your sister unearthed some other long-lost relative to embarrass us with?" But when Eleanor, her voice trembling but steady, laid out the truth, her brief relationship with Samuel years ago, her pregnancy, her fears, and Samuel's shocking reappearance and confession, Richard's arrogance slowly crumbled, replaced by a stunned, ashen disbelief. "No," he said, shaking his head, his voice hoarse. "No, it's not possible. Lily is... Lily is my daughter." "Richard," Eleanor said gently, tears in her eyes, "I believe that too. I want to believe it. But Samuel, there's no doubt. And deep down, I think I always knew there was a possibility." Richard stared at her, his face a mask of betrayal, of wounded pride. You lied to me? For all these years? You let me believe? I lied to myself too." "Richard," Eleanor whispered. "I was young, scared." "Scared?" He exploded, his voice raw with pain and fury. "You were deceitful. You married me under false pretenses. You passed off another man's child as mine." He lunged to his feet, pacing the room like a caged animal. "The gardener, our gardener. My God, the humiliation. Do you know what this means? What people will say?" Clara stepped forward. "Richard, right now, what people will say is the least of your concerns. Think about Lily. Think about what she needs." "What she needs?" Richard whirled on her. "She needs a father, a real father. Not some itinerant laborer who deceived his way into our lives." "Samuel didn't deceive anyone about who he was as a gardener, Richard," Clara said calmly. "And from what I've seen, he has been more of a father to Lily in his quiet kindness than you have with all your bluster and neglect." The truth in Clara's words seemed to deflate Richard momentarily. He sank back in his chair, his face buried in his hands. The fight went out of him, replaced by a crushing despair. The revelation had shattered his world as surely as it had Eleanor's. The days that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, tearful confessions, and agonizing decisions. The news of Samuel's paternity, once unleashed, could not be contained. The CFS investigation, ironically, became a secondary concern. The primary focus was now on the Van Cess' own fractured family. Eleanor and Richard, their marriage in ruins, agreed to a trial separation. Richard, to his credit, after the initial shock and rage, began to show a flicker of concern for Lily's well-being, though his pride was still deeply wounded. The most difficult conversation, of course, was with Lily. Eleanor, with Clara's gentle support, tried to explain things in a way a 5-year-old could understand. "Sweetheart," she began, "you know how much Mommy and Daddy Richard love you. And you know Samuel, who is our gardener." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. "Well, sometimes families are made in different ways. And Samuel is also your daddy. A special kind of daddy who helped make you a long time ago." Lily frowned, trying to process this. "So, I have 2 daddies." "Yes, in a way," Eleanor said, her heart aching. "And they both love you very much." It was a gross oversimplification, a glossing over of years of pain and deception. But it was a start. Lily was confused, of course, but her primary reaction was one of curious excitement. "Can I see Daddy Samuel now?" she asked. And so, a meeting was arranged. Samuel came to the house, no longer as a gardener, but as a father. The reunion between him and Lily was quiet, tentative, yet profoundly moving. There were no dramatic pronouncements, just a little girl running into the arms of a man whose kindness she had always instinctively recognized. Richard watched from a distance, his expression a mixture of pain, resentment, and a dawning, reluctant understanding. The stranger, in revealing his truth, had forced them all to confront their own. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. The lies were over. The healing, however painful, could begin. The truth, in its own season, had finally bloomed. The fallout from the revelation of Samuel's paternity was immense, rippling through the Vance family and their social circle with the force of an earthquake. The carefully constructed edifice of their lives had been demolished, and in its place lay the raw, challenging terrain of truth. Richard, unable to cope with the public implications and the private betrayal, moved out of the family home. Their separation was swift and, on the surface, amicable, though beneath lay layers of unresolved anger and hurt. His primary concern, beyond his wounded pride, became the financial settlements and the careful management of his public image. He agreed to joint custody of Lily, though his interactions with her remained strained, tinged with an awkwardness that spoke of his internal conflict. He was a father by law and social convention, but the biological and emotional ties that truly defined parenthood now lay elsewhere. For Eleanor, the journey was one of profound and painful self-discovery. The lies she had told herself, the compromises she had made, the life she had chosen out of fear rather than love, all came under harsh scrutiny. With Clara's unwavering support, she began the difficult process of dismantling her old life and tentatively exploring the shape of a new one. There were therapy sessions, tearful confrontations with her own past, and the daunting task of rebuilding her sense of self, no longer as Mrs. Richard Vance, society hostess, but as Eleanor, a woman, a mother, facing an uncertain future. Her relationship with Samuel evolved slowly, cautiously. The shared history, the shared love for Lily, formed a powerful bond, but it was also complicated by years of separation, secrets, and unspoken regrets. They met regularly, ostensibly for Lily's sake, but these meetings gradually became opportunities for them to talk, to understand each other, to tentatively explore the possibility of a future that neither of them had ever dared to imagine. Samuel, thrust into the role of a father he had never expected to claim, handled the situation with his characteristic quiet dignity and grace. He was patient with Lily, answering her endless questions, sharing his love for nature with her, and slowly, gently, building a paternal relationship based on honesty and affection. He made no demands on Eleanor, offered no recriminations for the lost years. His focus was solely on Lily's well-being and on navigating this new, unexpected chapter of his life with integrity. The CFS investigation, which had once seemed so threatening, faded into the background. Ms. Albright, informed of the true circumstances, though not the full extent of the past deception, which remained a private family matter, concluded her review. The initial anonymous tip, likely instigated by Richard and A. misguided attempt to discredit Samuel or by a malicious gossip like Mrs. Harrington, was now seen in a different light. The unusually close relationship between Lily and Samuel was no longer a cause for concern, but a testament to a biological bond that had unknowingly asserted itself. The Bellevue County Society, of course, buzzed with speculation and gossip. The Van Cess separation, Samuel's sudden prominence in Lily's life. It was all fodder for endless conjecture. Mrs. Harrington and her ilk had a field day, but Eleanor, to her own surprise, found that she cared less and less what they thought. The ordeal had stripped away her concern for social standing, replacing it with a fierce determination to protect her daughter and to live her own life authentically. Clara remained a steadfast presence, a rock of support for both Eleanor and Lily. Her journalistic instincts had been right. There had been a story, a deep, human drama hidden beneath the polished surface of the Vance family. But she had also rediscovered a sister, and in helping Eleanor navigate the crisis, she had found a renewed sense of purpose. Months turned into a year. The Vance mansion was sold, its opulent rooms too filled with ghosts and painful memories. Eleanor moved into a smaller, more modest house, one filled with light and laughter, a home where Lily could be herself, and where Samuel was a regular, welcome visitor. The relationship between Eleanor and Samuel was not a fairy tale romance rekindled. It was something quieter, deeper, forged in shared experience, shared loss, and a shared, overwhelming love for their daughter. They were co-parents, friends, and perhaps, in time, something more. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual respect and a growing affection. Lily, a resilient and adaptable child, blossomed. Having two daddies who loved her in their different ways became her new normal. She still saw Richard, though those visits were often tinged with a formality that was absent in her easy, joyful interactions with Samuel. One sunny afternoon, Eleanor, Samuel, and Lily were working together in the small garden behind Eleanor's new house. Lily, her hands covered in dirt, was chattering happily as she helped Samuel plant sunflower seeds. Eleanor watched them, a quiet smile on her face. The pain of the past year was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with a sense of peace, of hard-won authenticity. Samuel caught her eye and returned her smile. In his gaze, there was no trace of the haunted sadness she had once seen, only a deep, abiding love for their daughter and a gentle affection for her. The truth, in its tumultuous arrival, had indeed been painful. It had shattered lives, ended a marriage, and exposed years of deception. But it had also cleared the way for something new, something more honest. It had allowed a father to know his daughter, a mother to find her strength, and a child to be surrounded by a love that was, finally, open and true. The stranger who walked in and revealed the truth was, in many ways, Samuel himself, by finally voicing the secret of his paternity. But Clara, too, had been a stranger to Eleanor's recent life, and her arrival had been the catalyst that set the final unraveling in motion. Together, they had brought light into the shadows. Looking at Lily, laughing as Samuel showed her a wiggly earthworm, Eleanor knew that despite all the heartache, they would be all right. The most important truth of all, the unconditional love for a child, had endured, and in that there was hope and there was healing. Assumptions can be dangerous, and appearances can be profoundly deceiving. The story of the Vance family, of Samuel, and of little Lily serves as a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how long it is buried or how inconvenient it may seem, has an inexorable way of coming to light. Often, it is the innocent voice of a child, unburdened by societal prejudice or adult complexities, that speaks the most profound truths that can unravel carefully constructed facades and force a reckoning with long-held secrets. What this story teaches us is the immense courage it takes to confront one's past, to own one's mistakes, and to choose authenticity over artifice, even when the personal cost is great. It reminds us that true family is not always defined by convention or by blood alone, but by love, by presence, and by the willingness to nurture and protect. The judgments of society, the whispers of gossip, ultimately hold little power against the strength of genuine human connection and the relentless pursuit of an honest life. If you've ever witnessed a situation where appearances were deceiving, or where a hidden truth dramatically changed everything, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe is the most important factor in building truly authentic relationships? Don't forget to like this video if Lily's story touched your heart, and subscribe for more narratives that explore the complexities of human emotions and the power of truth. Sometimes, the most unexpected people walk into our lives to reveal the paths we were always meant to find.